One of the most prominent banking families there ever was. Follow me down the rabbit hole about the Rothschilds. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today we are talking about the Rothschild family. Thank you, Brian, Logan, Melissa, Haley, and John for this request. I know I had a couple more DMs on Instagram, so if you have requested this, thank you. I appreciate it. If you do not send the requests through the request link, I don't know who sent them to me. I lose requests in my messages on Instagram, so if you don't send them, I can't thank you personally, but I do know there were more people that requested this, so thank you. But if you are not, you can watch this episode on YouTube or on Rumble. If you are watching on YouTube and Rumble and you want to listen to it, you can go do that wherever you get your podcasts. Remember that you can find me on Patreon. I have a second tier coming very soon with bonus episodes. And if you want merch, that's in the links below. I'm wearing one of my shirts today. And of course, before we get started, I love to thank our sponsors. So thank you, Wise Wolf Gold, for sponsoring my podcast. Guys, if you want gold and silver delivered straight to your front door for as little as $50 a month, go to rabbithole.gold right now and you can sign up for a subscription. It's super easy, comes straight to your door, and that's really not that expensive for gold and silver, and you can start building your stash because our money, it's a little iffy. And we're going to talk about that today and how money is ruling the world. Go back to the gold standard. This episode is tricky because the Rothschilds have kept their family's history and like everything their family is doing relatively secret. Honestly, they've done a pretty decent job of their reputation as of late. When they first started coming to prominence, they kind of like their reputation got a little out of hand, and then they got really good at controlling the narrative. So it's hard to find like one book or one video, one article, one anything that tells you the whole story, going to multiple sources. I mean, that's normally what I do, but even then, it's really tricky. So if I leave something out, it's not on purpose. It's just a really hard story to tell. The Rothschild family is a Jewish noble banking family originally from Frankfurt. They are the most famous of all European banking dynasties. They have had considerable economic influence in Europe for over 200 years, and the family rose to prominence with Meyer. I don't know if it's Meyer or Mayer. It's Mayer. In my research, I heard it pronounced both ways. So, Mayer, Meyer. I'm gonna say Meyer. It could be Mayer. The family rose to prominence with Meyer Amschel Rothschild, known as the founding father of international finance. So Meyer Amschel Rothschild was born February 28th, 1744 in Frankfurt, which was part of the Holy Roman Empire at the time, but it's now Germany. He was born to an Ashkenazi Jewish family who lived in the Jewish ghetto. He was one of 8 children to Amschel Moses and his wife. He learned a great deal about trading through his father's textiles company, but actually he was training to be a rabbi as a child. Then, when he was about 13, he secured an apprenticeship under Jacob Wolf Oppenheimer at the banking firm of Simon Wolf Oppenheimer in Hanover. And he kind of had to like change his direction because his parents both died. So he needed to start making money. He couldn't be a rabbi. Samuel Oppenheimer's grandson taught Meyer useful knowledge in foreign trade and currency exchange. And at the time, Jews were allowed to lend money for profit, but Christians weren't allowed to lend money. And we get a little bit more in the weeds about exactly what they could do, but this led to a huge business opportunity for Jewish people. But the Jewish people were looked down on, so it was impressive that the Rothschild family could go on to not only keep their wealth, but also to become like nobility. Meyer returned to his brother's business in Frankfurt in 1763. He became a dealer in rare coins and won the patronage of Crown Prince Wilhelm of Hesse, gaining the title of court factor in 1769. Court factor, or court Jew, was the Jewish banker who handled the finances of royalty or nobility. The court factor would also like lend money. So not only did he handle the finances, he was also lending money to whoever might need it. And in this instance, like Crown Prince was one of like the main customers of Meyer Rothschild. In return for his services, the court factor gained social privileges. In some cases, they would even be granted noble status, which is what the Rothschild family would eventually receive. In a society that ranks classes, nobility is ranked immediately below royalty. So this is pretty big, especially for a Jewish family. Crown Prince Wilhelm was one of the wealthiest people in Europe at the time. So being able to run his finances was a huge opportunity. Meyer's coin business was flourishing as well. So it grew to include a number of princely patrons and continued expanding through the provision of banking services to Crown Prince Wilhelm. Crown Prince Wilhelm became Wilhelm the Ninth Landgrave of Hesse Cassel in 1785. Basically, he had jurisdiction over the territory. By the early 1800s, he was sending his sons all over Europe to establish branches of his business. So Meyer married Gödel, the daughter of a money changer, in 1770, and they got right to work having kids. They had 10 children. They had five boys and five girls. The five girls they don't really talk about because it was the time and the place. They basically just ignored their girls as with business. Like they probably raised them fine, but when it comes to business or like family trees, I found family trees of the Rothschilds, but I did not find like really what happened to the girls. Like you can see maybe who they married in some of the family trees, but you can't see like if they had any children or what their children went on to do. They no none of that. But everything that the boys were doing, you can see everybody they married, how many children they had, what their children are doing, where they're at, because they didn't really care about their girls. So 10 boys, 10 girls. The boys were Amschel, or he went by Anselm Meyer, Solomon Meyer, Nathan Meyer, um, Kalman, who went by Carl, and then Jacob, who went by James. So Meyer had set the pattern that his family would follow for generations after on how to do business successfully. Do business with reigning houses and to father as many sons as possible who could take care of the family's many business affairs abroad. He and his oldest son, Anselm, stayed in Frankfurt, growing the business there while he sent his other sons elsewhere. So Nathan established a bank in London in 1804. He was initially sent to England in 1789 with 20,000 pounds to further the family interest in textile importing. Jacob was sent to Paris in 1811. And then Solomon and Carl were sent to Vienna and Naples in the 1820s. All the while, the family was profiting off the wars that were going on. In 1806, Napoleon invaded Hesse because Wilhelm supported Prussia, and this sent Wilhelm into exile. But Meyer was still his banker and took his money and invested it for him. In 1810, Meyer and his three eldest sons entered into a formal partnership, founding M.A. Rothschild and Sons. In 1811, James was sent to Paris, like I said, and this move allowed the family to profit from the financing of the Peninsular War. This was the war between Portugal, Spain, and the United Kingdom against the invading and occupying forces of the First French Empire during the Napoleonic Wars. In order to finance this war, they needed to source large quantities of gold from the British government. Usually, court factors lost their wealth through violence or expropriation, but the way Meyer set up their international banking business safeguarded their wealth. Their assets were held in financial instruments circulating through the world as stocks, bonds, and debts. So mobsters and greedy monarchs usually could strong arm their way into people's finances, but not with the Rothschilds because he had set it up internationally. What set the Rothschild family apart was that they would communicate using private carriers, which allowed them to get quick updates on the happenings of each other around Europe. And they were also very, very close. They were a very close-knit family, and their closeness was a benefit to them, whereas like a lot of families, like the sons would have been sent to different countries, they basically stopped talking. Now they are the new patriarch of the family, and whoever happened before that, it didn't matter. But that's why Meyer set it up the way he did, and he's considered the patriarch and where the family starts because he had all of his sons basically joining forces, and they were giving each other tips and tricks. They were helping each other out. When James needed something in Paris, Nathan would help him from London. Or, we had Anselm in Frankfurt. If he needed whatever, the other brothers would step in and help. And we see how close they are because when they named their children, they named them all their brothers' names. So the way they did things was decades ahead of other financial networks. Most financial networks didn't talk to each other. And if there were multiple banks, they were either in the same city or that was it. So the fact that they had these private couriers, and they had a lot of them, they had several that were they were employed by the family and would go to the different countries delivering messages. It was much faster than using like a postal service at the time. And of course, they didn't just focus on financing individuals. They were focused on financing nations because they knew like that's where the money was. They could move money across borders faster than anyone else, which allowed them to outmaneuver rivals and control capital flows, especially during wars. On September 19th, 1812, Meyer Rothschild died, and then Anselm took over the Frankfurt branch and M.A. Rothschild and Son. Out of the five sons, Nathan and James had the most success. Nathan first established a business in the textile trading and financing business, but later moved to London and started dealing in the London Stock Exchange. He became a Freemason of the Emulation Lodge in 1802. In 1806, he married Hannah Barrett Cohen, and Hannah was actually the aunt of Benjamin Frederick David Phillips, the founder of Phillips, the company, and she was also the aunt of Karl Marx. So they had their ties, their hands kind of everywhere. In 1809, Nathan started dealing in gold bullion and developed this as his main business. This business became N.M. Rothschild and Sons, and this bank is still in operation today. In 1811, he took on the transfer of money to pay the British troops who were fighting in the Peninsular War against Napoleon, and he later made subsidy payments to British allies to bolster their military capabilities and maintain resistance against Napoleon's forces during the Russian campaign. In 1818, he arranged a £5 million loan to the Prussian government. This issuing of bonds for government loans became a cornerstone in his bank's business. In 1824, with his brother in law, his wife's sister's husband, they founded the Alliance Assurance Company. Later, this company would merge with Sun Insurance to form Sun Alliance. And then later it'd have more mergers, but Sun Alliance, most people know that. And Nathan was doing so well, and he had gained so much power in London that by 1825, 1826 timeframe, he was able to supply enough coin to the Bank of England to enable it to avert a liquidity crisis. He was really good at finding ways to profit off of everything the British government did. Everything. Like in the aftermath of the Slavery Abolition Act in 1833 and with the Slavery Compensation Act of 1837, he actually loaned the government 15 million pounds, which is equivalent to about $1.8 billion today, to compensate the slave owners in the British Empire. Like that was the trade-off. You stop owning slaves and we'll give you some money for it. And with the interest from this debt, it wasn't actually paid off until 2015. That's how long the British government was paying on this debt. And under these acts, Nathan was a claimant because he owned a plantation with about 160 slaves on it. So he ended up receiving about 2,500 pounds in compensation, which would be 309,000 pounds today, roughly. But he received this money, and then he also gets the interest payments from the British government because he loaned that money to them. So he's like kind of double dipping here. In 1835, he secured a contract with the Spanish government, giving him the rights to mines in southern Spain, and this acquisition gained him a mercury monopoly. In 1836, he traveled to Frankfurt to attend his son's wedding, and he did plan on going back to London, but he fell too ill to travel. On July 28th of 1836, Nathan Rothschild died due to an infected abscess. His son Lionel, whose wedding he was attending, took over the business in England. Due to his work in London and Europe, he had secured the family's position as the foremost investment bankers and a major power in European affairs. And then you have James Rothschild. I'm not going to go over every single brother. I'm not going to do the other three just because I'm just doing the two most prominent Rothschilds, and this is where a lot of the money came from. But they were all doing very well in their respective areas. So James Rothschild, Nathan's brother, and the son that went to France had the second most success of the five sons. So he moved to Paris in 1812 to coordinate the purchase of specie and bullion for his brother Nathan, who had basically been working in the gold business. And that was like one of the biggest things that he was doing in London. He was like, hey, James, I need you to go to Paris because I need some help with this. James was the linchpin in Nathan's plan to provide funds for the armies during the war because he was placed in France. In 1817, he had expanded his family's banking empire to Paris. He opened the Rothschild Frères, and by 1823, the branch was firmly established as banker to the French government, which is exactly what their father had taught them to do. He became the advisor to ministers and kings, making him the most powerful banker in the country. Following the Napoleonic Wars, he was a major financier of the construction of railroads and the mining business. This was a huge contributor to France's emergence as an industrial power. James invested in importation of tea and wine, among so many other things, and his investments helped to make him one of the richest men in the world. In 1823, he was awarded the French Legion of Honor, and this is the highest and most prestigious French national order of merit. And there are 5 degrees of the order. So you have Knight, Officer, Commander, Grand Officer, and Grand Cross. In 1824, James married his niece. Yes, you heard me right. James married his niece, Betty von Rothschild. She was the daughter of his brother Solomon. The July 1830 revolution brought about a new king of France, and with this, James put together a loan package to stabilize the finances of the new government. The government needed a second loan in 1834, and I'm assuming that when he was awarded the Legion of Honor, he was first in knight status. But with these loan packages that he had created for this new king of France, he also was elevated to the dignity of Grand Officer within the Legion of Honor. In 1835, he created racing stables at his estate. These stables still exist, but have since been moved to Normandy. And they are one of the oldest stables in France. After Nathan died in 1836, James took over the management of the family firm. In 1838, he created a lucrative gold refining business. And with the outbreak of the French Revolution in 1848, the king was forced to abdicate the throne. Now, under Emperor Napoleon III, James lost part of his political influence, but this was only a minor setback for the family because they survived the change and then prospered under the new regime, which of course they did. In 1852, the bank Credit Mobilier was established and threatened the Rothschild banking empire. This wasn't just in France, it actually spread to other countries as well. But of course, like they would never let that happen. Outside of banking, James was super interested in wine, so he purchased Chateau Lafite in 1868. And this is one of France's most outstanding vineyards. And to this day, the Rothschild family still owns this business. I mean, I think now they own like 13 or something vineyards. We'll get into that. I have it written down later in my notes. 3 months after purchasing the vineyard, James died, and over 10,000 people showed up to pay their respects at his funeral. His sons, Alphonse and Gustave, took over the vast French business empire, with some of his industrial interests spreading as far as Africa and South Sea islands. So, some just general things about the family. In 1816, the Rothschilds were raised to nobility by the Emperor of Austria, and this allowed them to prefix the Rothschilds' name with von. However, outside of the German speaking world, it was more common to use the French title of de. And this is why James is referred to as James de Rothschild, while Karl is Karl von Rothschild because he was in a German speaking country or he preferred that prefix. In 1822, they were granted the title of Baron or raised to the Friernstand by the emperor. So this meant that they could call themselves Friar von Rothschild or Baron de Rothschild. This was basically just like an aristocratic title. Nathan chose not to use the title of Baron, but he did accept the title so that way his children could use it. James did use it. So James was Baron James de Rothschild. Another thing I found about the family is that they liked to keep it in the family, like I talked about a little bit earlier. So this was heavily encouraged by their father before he died. He was like, hey, keep it close. That way the wealth is always within the family. It doesn't go elsewhere, which is also why he didn't leave any money to his daughters because his daughters, when they married into a different family. So he's like, oh, no, no, no. They're not Rothschilds anymore. Now they're Smiths. I just made that up. Like, right, whoever they married into. So he encouraged his sons to marry and his grandchildren to marry in the family. And this is still like, I want to say to this day, but this was a common practice up until like the middle to late 20th century. So, like, James married his niece, Betty, Solomon's daughter. Solomon's son married Nathan's daughter, and they were first cousins. Nathan's son married Carl's daughter. Again, first cousins. I go on and on. It gets really confusing. It's really hard to keep up with who's who and what's what. But in the 18 marriages of Meyer's grandchildren, 16 were married to first cousins. And of the two remaining, at least one of them was married to an uncle. So I didn't go through every single one. I don't know what that, like, they're either married to a first cousin or an uncle. I don't know what the very last, like, of the 18 who they married, but they're definitely keeping it in the family. The Naples branch of the business closed in 1863, and with the lack of male heirs, the Frankfurt branch closed in 1901 because Amsterdam never had any children. After the Nazis invaded Austria in 1938, the Vienna branch closed as well. But the family is still going strong today. Many Rothschilds still live in Europe, while others live in Israel and the United States. Emma Rothschild is a history professor at Harvard. David Mayer de Rothschild is an environmental activist, among a number of other things. Hannah Rothschild is an author, documentary, filmmaker, businesswoman, and philanthropist. Actually, a lot of them are philanthropists. James Rothschild is a financier, and he is married to Nikki Hilton. Nikki Hilton being the hotel heiress and sister of Paris Hilton. Just to like name a couple of them. There's a bunch of other Rothschilds out there still doing a lot of things. The combined wealth of the Rothschild family across all its branches is estimated it's estimated a lot of different times. The highest estimation I saw was like $23 trillion is what they're worth. Although I also saw like in a different source at the exact same time, they're only worth $1 billion. And then a lot of people are like, well, they're not even listed on the top billionaires in the world. They have been very good at hiding what they're doing. So even now, if you look them up, it's like, oh, the Rothschilds, they're just like doing whatever. Not a big deal. They're not even that rich anymore, which like $1 billion is still a lot of money. But like $15 trillion, $23 trillion, like that's a lot of money. And there's only like, I don't know, maybe like high 20s, 30 members of the family, which is a lot of people still. But you're spreading like $23 trillion potentially over, let's call it 25 people. I don't know. That's still, I mean, I'd take that. And the Rothschilds own and sit on the boards of various companies still. So Nathaniel Rothschild was the co-chair of the hedge fund Atticus Capital from 1996 until it closed. Now he is the executive chairman of the board of directors at Volex, an electrical manufacturing company. Lynn Forrester de Rothschild is the CEO of EL Rothschild. This company has investments in media, wealth management, infrastructure, real estate, agriculture, and consumer goods. So, basically everything, which actually gives them a hand up. If they have investments in the media, they control the media. You have investments in wealth management, of course you do, because you have a vast wealth. You need to continue to manage it. Infrastructure, now you're building. Real estate, now you're selling where people are going to build. Agriculture, now you're going to control people's food sources and consumer goods, everything else that they're also consuming. So you're controlling the food, you're controlling the media, you're controlling the goods, you're controlling the world, as well as the money. You obviously they are controlling the money. And they actually have a number of holding companies that run the family banks. So they have Rothschild Continuation Holdings, Concordia BV, Paris Orleans SA, Rothschild Concordia SAS, and Edmond de Rothschild Group. Although the Edmond de Rothschild Group does more than just banking, they cover a mix of activities to include farming, luxury hotels, real estate, winemaking, and yacht racing. The family owns 15 wine estates in France alone, not to mention the many wine estates across North and South America, South Africa, and Australia. And of course, there is a Rothschild Foundation because every ultra rich family has to have a foundation. That's how they get past the taxes. But with all that, you're here for the conspiracies. Before we get into these conspiracies, please know that many of them are anti Semitic. This is because the family is Jewish. You're not going to have a Jewish family and not have anti Semitism mixed in, unfortunately. So these theories do not represent my own feelings about the Rothschild family or Jewish people or anything like that. It's just the conspiracies that I found on the internet to share with you. The first conspiracy theories about the family stem from Nathan Rothschild profiting off of the Battle of Waterloo. This is like the very first time you hear anything about like the Rothschild family being a little shady. So a pamphlet came out in Paris in 1846, and it was written by an anonymous pamphleteer who went by the pseudonym Satan, stating that Nathan knew the outcome of the battle before the government did and could in turn profit from it. There have been a couple different versions of this theory that I've heard, that I've read. One of them is that there was a private courier, which we know that they used a lot in that time, that was at the battle and then told Nathan the outcome of the battle before the government had learned about the outcome. Or another theory is that Nathan was actually there and he saw what the outcome was going to be and that France was going to lose. And then he came back and bought a bunch of stocks that the war had driven down. And now that the war was going to be over, he's got all these stocks, and now the stock prices are going to go way back up. And he knew 24 hours in advance before the government knew the outcome of the battle. Either way you slice this, this was insider trading. Before insider trading was really even talked about or was like really fraud, like this was insider trading. And Nathan made a lot of money off this battle, off the end of the war. He made so much money because he was working in the stock market. In this same pamphlet, which came out 30 years after the Battle of Waterloo and 10 years after Nathan's death, it claimed that James, who had owned a railroad, neglected the maintenance on it. And then there was an accident on this railroad, and a bunch of people died because of it. And then these theories started the belief that the Rothschilds were greedy manipulators, and it showed that they were cheap because they didn't want to maintain the railroad. They didn't really care about the ordinary man because he didn't really care that all these guys just died because of the lack of maintenance. And then these theories were transferred from just being the Rothschilds to being all Jews. And this is actually where a lot of the stereotypes for Jews come from. They were being called cheap and greedy and tight with their money. But it also comes from the lending of money to Christians. So the Rothschilds were eventually called the kings of Jews and the string pullers of string pullers. Like they were called all these names. Like I said, their reputation then was so much worse than it is today. So the Rothschilds were lending money to Christians. They basically like lent money indiscriminately. They didn't care as long as they were going to get interest back. It was considered a sin at the time for a religion to lend money with interest to a member of the same religion, but not to other religions. So, like, Jews could lend money to Jews, but not for interest. Or, like, Christians could lend money to Christians, but not for interest. Well, the Jews were like, you know what we should do? We should lend money to Christians with interest, which they could because they had more money. They were good with their money. They were very good with their money. And the Christians needed money to build churches, castles, to equip their armies, like whatever they needed to do, they needed money. And they had to get their money from somewhere. They didn't have enough of it. And the Jews and Christians really didn't interact except when the Jews came to collect on their debts. And no one likes a debt collector. So of course, like the Christians hated the Jews. And they also didn't really like the Jews because they seemed to always have money and they never had the money. And they're like, well, how come you guys always have this money? You're always lending it to us for a stupid amount of interest. Like, and then you're always coming to ask us for payments. So Christians and Jews, they were not getting along. And then the Jews typically were living in the ghetto, which is why like mobsters and monarchs, people were coming to take the Jewish money. And that's why it was really important that Meyer Rothschild put his money in different countries and move it around. That way they couldn't just come and be like, oh, you have all this money under your mattress? It's mine now. And then you have the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which revealed the secret plans of Jews to take over the world. So this work is usually dismissed as an anti-Semitic hoax, but that doesn't take away from it potentially being true. It was first published in Russia in 1903, but it was translated to multiple languages and disseminated throughout the world. Henry Ford funded the printing and distribution throughout the US. Hitler was a major proponent of the text, and it said that this was his primary justification for initiating the Holocaust. The protocols allegedly document the minutes from a meeting of Jewish leaders in the late 19th century discussing their goals of global Jewish dominance. The plan was to subvert the morals of the Gentiles by controlling the press and the world economies, which they're still doing now, by the way. The protocols of the elders of Zion are said to be anti Semitic, like I said, but some think that they're kind of just packaged like that on purpose. Firstly, it said that this text isn't even about Jewish leaders at all, but instead issued from a Masonic body practicing the Scottish Rite and or the Illuminati, which doesn't eliminate the Rothschild family because we know that at least Nathan was a member of the Freemasons, and it wouldn't surprise me if they all were. And the Rothschilds are one of the 13 key Illuminati families. So, of course, like they're part of both of these things. But also, if it's packaged as anti Semitic, then they can discredit them and say that it's just fictional text. So, they're really using this anti Semitism to their advantage. The most widely spread and believed conspiracy is that the Rothschilds control the world through financial means. And they have loaned money to governments since the days of Meyer Rothschild. So is this to control the outcome of things or just to make money off the wars? It's even suggested that they loaned money to Adolf Hitler, although it's hard to find much on this because how terrible would it look for this prominent Jewish family to have loaned money to this man who committed atrocities against the Jewish people? Like that would be awful. So they've definitely kept that on the down low if they did do it. But maybe they lent the money when Hitler was coming to power. Because we know during the war, the Nazis took art and jewelry from the Rothschilds in Frankfurt. And we also know that Hitler was using the Vatican Bank during the war. But the question I came up with was like, who funded him as he was rising to power? I mean, it definitely could have been the Rothschilds. Because with this, there's another theory that the Rothschilds funded Hitler because they knew he was going to kill Jews and was trying to kill the true Jewish people so that the fake Jews could be protected after the war. Because if you look at how people react to anti-Semitism now versus how they reacted then, it's drastically different. They didn't care about the Jews back then. They were putting them in Jewish ghettos, right? Like they're like, yeah, put that's a Jewish ghetto. We don't care about those guys. That was totally okay. But now, if you say like put that guy in a Jewish ghetto, people would lose their freaking minds. But before Hitler, there are claims that the Rothschilds funded both sides of World War One. And it's widely accepted that the Federal Reserve funded the Allies in the war, but the Federal Reserve of New York was controlled by five banks, which owned 53% of its stock. These five banks were all controlled by N.M. Rothschild and Sons. So maybe all of the Federal Reserve was controlled by the Rothschilds. They were definitely one of the prominent families that wanted it set up. During the war, the Balfour Declaration was made public. It was a public statement issued by the British government announcing its support for the establishment of the national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. This letter was sent from Arthur Balfour, who was the British Foreign Secretary, to Lionel Rothschild, who was the leader of the British Jewish community. And of course, they wanted the Rothschilds to pay for this, and of course they did. And that led to them basically owning Israel. They funded the early settlers. They are still funding them now. They funded the building of the Knesset, which is its unicameral legislature of Israel. And the Knesset passes like all the laws, elects the president and the prime minister, approves the cabinet, and supervises the work of the government. They funded the Supreme Court building, which is full of occult symbols, by the way. And I mean, we talked about this with the Vatican episode. Why would you have symbols for things against your religion when that is specifically written against? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. There's like 13 different places in Israel named after the Rothschilds family because of how much money they've given to the funding of Israel. But let's go back to this occult thing for a second, because the Rothschilds are an occult family. They're like this black magic family. That's why they have the Surrealist Ball. And this ball is like super weird. It's hosted at their chateau in France, and the participants wear costumes. The first invitations for this party went out in 1972, with the dress code being black tie, long dress, and surrealist heads. The plates were covered in fur, the tables were decorated with like taxidermy, and the food was served on mannequin corpses on a bed of roses. Very weird. And everybody wanted to come. Like, if you were in the government, you were royal, you were famous, like, everybody wanted to come to these parties. And somebody even said, like, I will commit suicide if I don't get an invitation to a surrealist ball. At these balls, they always have at least one person wearing the head of a goat, basically dressed as Baphomet. Baphomet is a deity that is incorporated across various occult and esoteric traditions. And there have been a number of groups, religions, and industries to be said to be worshiping Baphomet. Even like the Knights Templar are said to have worshipped him. And you can see symbols of Baphomet all throughout Hollywood, even today, and in different movies. That's a whole different episode for a different day. But people are constantly referring back to this deity who is basically like an occult deity. But it makes you wonder, like, why would a Jew who married a Catholic be worshiping Baphomet? And then why would that same Jewish family continue on the tradition unless they were an occult family? And like, these parties aren't just for fun, they are rituals. Like, after the party, they have these after parties, right? Where they have different party traditions, one of which is hunting down the stag. Similar to the movie Ready or Not, if you've seen that movie. If you haven't, it's basically about this bride on her wedding night. She is hunted by her husband's wealthy family as part of a wedding night ritual to worship the devil. And if she can survive to the next day, then she's good. Like, they're good to be married. But it makes you wonder, like, where did Hollywood get that idea? Maybe from this ball? Anyway, outside of that, right now everyone's like, "Oh, the Rothschilds, they've kind of fallen off. Their business has dwindled. They're not as prominent as they once were. They don't have as much power." But that couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, like I said, they've always been very secretive, but they've gotten way better at hiding their power. They like just mask it. Like during the American Revolution, they had an agent making loans to the Americans that like this agent never said that it worked for the Rothschilds. So the people that were receiving these loans for the American Revolution, they had no idea who was giving them the loans. They just knew it was this guy. Well, on the back end, the Rothschilds, still in London, are loaning to the British government as well. But not only that, they've basically funded everything. So they're funding both world wars. They're funding both sides of the American Revolution, Napoleonic Wars. They funded England's purchase of the Suez Canal. They funded oil exploration in Russia and the Sahara Desert. They financed the czars of Russia. They supported Cecil Rhodes' diamond operations. They aided France in creating an empire in Africa. They saved the Vatican from bankruptcy. They financed Rockefeller's Standard Oil, Carnegie Steel, and Harriman's Railroad in the United States. Like they've literally, everybody that's prominent has gotten money from the Rothschilds, which is terrifying because when we talk about the elites, everyone's like, oh, the Rothschilds, they've fallen off. They want you to think that. When we're talking about the elites, the Rothschilds are like some of the highest elites that we are talking about. No wonder Mr. Hilton wanted his daughter, Nikki, to marry James Rothschild. That's like the person to marry. In the heart of London, there is 1 square mile that is the financial district known as the City. It is virtually the financial hub of the world. So there's like this really big mansion that the Rothschilds own, and all the banks are in this 1 square mile in the middle of the city. It's known as the City. And it's actually been referred to as the wealthiest square mile on Earth and has enjoyed so many special rights and privileges and a certain level of independence since 1191. In 1215, its citizens received a charter from King John granting them the right to annually elect a mayor known as the Lord Mayor, a tradition that is still going on. They still elect a mayor. Both E.C. Newth in his book Empire of the City and Des Griffin in his book Descent into Slavery stated their belief that the city is actually like a sovereign state, much like the Vatican has been removed from Rome, right? And that since the establishment of the privately owned Bank of England in 1694, the city has actually become the last word in the country's national affairs, with prime ministers, the cabinet, parliament becoming only like a front for the real power that the city has over the UK. According to Newth, when the Queen enters the city or the King, she or he is subservient to the Lord Mayor. And under this Lord Mayor is a committee of 12 to 14 men known as the Crown. Because this privately owned corporation is not subject to the Queen or the Parliament. Having consolidated their financial grip on most of the European nations by the middle of the last century, the international bankers worked feverishly to extend their sphere of influence to the ends of the earth in preparation for the final assault on the United States, a nation which, through its own unique constitution, remains free. In the decades that followed, it became pretty apparent that in order to achieve their goal of world dominance, they would have to instigate a series of world wars, which would result in leveling of the old world in preparation for the construction of the New World Order, which is Satan's plan. This plan is outlined in graphic detail by Albert Pike, the sovereign grand commander of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry and the top illuminist in America. One thing is very clear: money moves the world. Too many people worship money, but also it holds a lot of power. Like the people that have the money have the power because they can literally pay anybody to do almost anything. People's morals get really low when they're offered a substantial amount of money. Nathan Rothschild once said, quote, "I care not what puppet is placed upon the throne of England to rule the empire on which the sun never sets. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply." This is what he thought of Britain at the time, but what the family would go on to think of the world. So if you think that the Rothschilds are just going about their day, they don't have any control over the world, you are so wrong. They're still financing so much of the world right now. They finance so much of the world up to what we know, and they're going to continue on. But I don't know if there's a lot any of us can actually do about that. Anyway, until next week, my friends, stay skeptical, and I will see you all then. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast with everything you hear done by me, Danny Mercy. I appreciate all of your support. Please rate and review wherever you're listening. If you want to follow us on Instagram, it's at rabbit.holepodcast. And thank you, Zakar Balaha, for our awesome intro.